I've been all over this world. I seen men die in ways I ain't even know was possible. Love you, brother. I will. I ain't ever seen no demons, no magic. Let me in, man. Some weird shit going on out here.
You keep dancing with the... One day he's gonna follow you home.
Girl, what if the real monsters aren't hiding in the dark but living among us? Shah Sinners 2025 delivers shocking twists, terrifying vampires, and a story that will keep you hooked until the very end. Stay with SA Film Facts as we reveal the full story, hidden details, and amazing facts you probably missed. Sinners is a 2025 American horror movie produced, written, and directed by Ryan Coogler. The story takes place in 1932 in the Mississippi Delta and stars Michael B. Jordan in two different roles as twin brothers with a criminal past. After spending years away, the brothers return to their hometown in the Jim Crow South, hoping to start fresh. But instead of finding peace, they come face to face with a terrifying supernatural evil that turns their lives into a nightmare. The movie also stars Hailee Steinfeld, Miles Keaton in his first movie role, Jack O'Connell, Wunmi Mosaku, James Lawson, Omar Benson Miller, and Delroy Lindo. Ryan Coogler started developing Sinners through his production company, Proximity Media, with Michael B. Jordan chosen as the lead star from the beginning. The project was officially announced in January 2024, and after several major studios competed for the rights, Warner Brothers Pictures secured the distribution deal the following month. More cast members joined the movie in April 2024. Filming took place between April and July 2024. The movie's soundtrack was composed by Ludwig Göransson, who has worked with Kugler on several previous projects. Along with creating the score, Göransson also served as an executive producer on the film. Sinners had its world premiere on April 3, 2025 at AMC Lincoln Square in New York City before hitting theaters across the United States on April 18, 2025. The movie was a huge hit with both critics and audiences, earning around $370 million worldwide while being made on a budget of about $90 100 million. It was praised for its powerful performances, emotional storytelling, creepy atmosphere, and incredible visuals. Both the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute named it one of the top 10 movies of 2025. The film also became one of the biggest award contenders of the year. It received a record breaking 16 Academy Award nominations at the 98th Oscars and won 4 Oscars, including Best Actor for Michael B. Jordan, Best Original Screenplay for Ryan Coogler, Best Cinematography for Autumn Durald Akapar, who became the first woman ever to win in that category, and Best Original Score for Ludwig Göransson. Sinners also earned 13 BAFTA Award nominations, winning 3, including another Best Original Screenplay award for Coogler. On top of that, it won 4 Critics' Choice Awards, 2 Golden Globe Awards, 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards, including Outstanding Performance by a Cast in a Motion Picture, and made history at the 57th NAACP Image Awards with 18 nominations and 13 wins, including Outstanding Motion Picture. The movie's incredible success made it one of the most talked about and celebrated films of 2025. Long ago, people believed that a few special people were born with a gift for music so powerful that it could blur the line between life and death. In Ireland, these gifted people were called Fili. In the Choctaw Nation, they were known as firekeepers, and in Africa, they were called griots. Their music could heal people, bring communities together, and keep old traditions alive. But this rare gift also attracted dark and evil forces. The story begins in 1932 with identical twin brothers Elijah Smokemore and Elias Stackmore, both played by Michael B. Jordan. The brothers are World War I veterans who returned to their hometown of Clarksdale, Mississippi, after spending 7 years in Chicago working for the city's mob. Using money they stole from dangerous criminal gangs, they buy an old abandoned sawmill from a landowner named Hogwood. Their dream is to turn it into a lively juke joint where the local black community can enjoy music, food, and good times. Before leaving, the twins warn Hogwood to keep his Ku Klux Klan friends far away from their new business. Their younger cousin Sammy, a talented singer and guitar player, decides to join them even though his father, Pastor Jedediah, strongly believes that blues music is sinful and wants him to stay away from it. Smoke thinks they should wait another week before opening the club, but Stack insists they have to open that very night. During their conversation, Stack reveals a painful family secret, saying that Smoke killed their abusive father after years of watching him beat Stack. To get everything ready, the brothers gather a team. They hire an older blues musician named Delta Slim to perform for $40 a night plus free beer. They ask local Chinese shop owners Grace and Bo Chow to supply all the food and drinks for the club. They also hire a strong field worker named Cornbread to work as the bouncer. Finally, Smoke asks his estranged wife Annie to cook for everyone during opening night. Annie believes that her hoodoo magic protected the twins while they were away in Chicago. Smoke doesn't believe her because Annie couldn't save their baby daughter who died years earlier. Deep down, Smoke still carries that heartbreak. Stack later admits that he still loves Annie and has never stopped caring about her. While preparing for the grand opening, Stack unexpectedly runs into his former girlfriend Mary. She has very light skin and can pass as white, which made their relationship dangerous during that time. Years earlier, Stack suddenly left her without saying goodbye because he thought it would keep her safe from racist people. Mary is furious and heartbroken. She tells him she truly believed he would come back someday and waited for him for years, only to realize he never returned. At the train station, Sammy meets a beautiful singer named Pearline while he and Stack are picking up Delta Slim. Pearline tells Sammy that she is already married, but the two still feel an instant connection. On the ride back, Delta Slim tells a heartbreaking story about another black singer who became successful performing for wealthy white audiences. After earning a lot of money, the singer decided to leave town by train. Before he could escape, members of the Ku Klux Klan captured him. They stole all of his money, falsely accused him of murdering a wealthy white man and attacking the man's wife, then lynched him without giving him any chance to defend himself. At the same time, somewhere else in Mississippi, an Irish immigrant vampire named Remick is being hunted by Choctaw vampire hunters. Looking for shelter, he hides with a married clansman couple named Bert and Joan. Instead of thanking them, Remick bites both of them and turns them into vampire servants called thralls. A thrall is someone who completely loses their free will after being turned into a vampire and becomes fully controlled by their vampire master. That evening, the Jew joint finally opens. Sammy, Delta Slim, and Perline perform for the excited crowd. When Sammy begins singing and playing his guitar, something incredible happens. His music is so powerful that it unknowingly calls the spirits of musicians from both the past and the future. For a brief moment, people from different generations appeared together, united through the magic of music. After the performance, Perline agrees to spend the night with Sammy, and the two become intimate. Their relationship grows closer as they share a romantic moment together. Unfortunately, Sammy's magical performance also catches the attention of Remick and his growing group of vampires. They arrive outside the club, offering money and music if the brothers will let them inside. Smoke immediately senses something is wrong and refuses to open the door. Soon the twins realize another major problem. Most of their customers don't have real cash. Instead, they are paying with plantation company scrip, which has almost no value outside the plantations. This means the club may never become profitable. Thinking they desperately need outside money, Mary walks outside to speak with Remick. Instead, Remick bites her and turns her into a vampire. Mary returns to the club, seduces Stack, and suddenly bites him, leaving him mortally wounded. Smoke quickly shoots Mary, but the bullets have no effect, and she escapes into the darkness. Later, Cornbread goes outside to relieve himself, where Remick attacks and turns him into a vampire as well. Cornbread returns to the club but cannot enter because vampires need permission before crossing the doorway. Annie immediately realizes that Cornbread is no longer alive. Cornbread calmly asks Smoke for his paycheck. As soon as Smoke reaches outside to hand him the money, Cornbread tries to grab him and bite him. Smoke shoots him in the chest, but even that doesn't stop the undead monster. Realizing the danger, Smoke shuts the club down early. As customers begin leaving, Remick and his vampires attack them outside, turning many of them into vampires. Stack also comes back to life as a vampire, but Annie fights him off by spraying him with pickled garlic juice, forcing him to retreat. Annie explains that they are dealing with vampires and tells everyone how to fight them. She says that when someone becomes a vampire, their soul becomes trapped inside their body and can never join their ancestors. Knowing what could happen, Annie asks Smoke to kill her immediately if she is ever bitten. Outside, Cornbread tricks Bochow into coming out and turns him into another vampire. Since Remick still can't enter without permission, he threatens to attack the Chow family's home and turn their young daughter Lisa into a vampire. He then offers to leave everyone else alone if they hand over Sammy, whose magical music could help him reconnect with the lost souls of his ancient vampire community. Remick, along with Stack and Mary, tries to convince everyone that becoming a vampire means living forever and being completely free. He also reveals a shocking secret. Hogwood, the man who sold Smoke the sawmill, is actually the leader of the local Ku Klux Klan, and the Klan plans to attack the club at sunrise. Even worse, the old sawmill wasn't really a mill at all. It had once been a slaughterhouse where many black people were brutally murdered. Remick continues threatening Grace by saying that after biting Bo, he now knows everything about her family and promises to turn little Lisa next. Furious and determined to stop the vampires before they hurt anyone else, Grace makes a desperate decision and invites them inside the club. A massive and bloody fight immediately breaks out. During the battle, Grace, Bo, Annie, and Delta Slim are all killed. Annie is bitten by Stack, and before she can become a vampire, Smoke tearfully grants her final wish by ending her life himself. Heartbroken over Annie's death, Mary runs away while Remick turns Paline into another vampire. Smokes manages to overpower Stack, while Sammy helps defeat Remick. As the sun finally rises, Its light burns Remick and his entire vampire army to ashes. Knowing he doesn't have much time left, Smoke sends Sammy away to safety. Smoke then confronts Hogwood and the Ku Klux Klan members, killing them one by one. During the fight, Smoke is fatally shot. After dying, he is reunited with Annie and their young daughter in the afterlife. Meanwhile, Samis ignores his father's request to leave music behind and instead travels to Chicago to chase his dream of becoming a blues musician. The story then jumps ahead to 1992. Sammy is now an older man and a famous blues musician. One night, while performing at his local blues club, he receives an unexpected visit from Stack and Mary, who have remained young because they are vampires. Stack reveals that before Smoke died, he spared Stack's life after making him promise to leave Sammy alone forever. Stacker offers Sammy the chance to become a vampire so he can escape old age and death. Sammy politely refuses, saying he has lived a full and meaningful life and is ready to accept whatever comes next. Before leaving, Sammy plays one final song for Stack and Mary as they walk away. Sammy quietly admits that even though the memories of that terrible night still haunt him before all the violence started, it was the greatest day of his life. Stack sadly agrees, saying it was the last time he ever saw his brother smoke, the last time he felt the warmth of the sun, and the only day when all of them were truly free, casting Michael B. Jordan as Elijah Smokemore and Elias Stack Moore Michael B. Jordan anchors Sinners in a dual role that defines the film's central dynamic. He portrays the identical twin brothers known as the Smokestack twins. Elijah Smokemore, the older, more serious, pragmatic, and straightforward of the pair, and Elias Stackmore, the younger, more cheerful and charming sibling. Both characters are World War I veterans who spent years working for the Chicago mob before returning to their hometown of Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1932. Using money obtained through their criminal activities, they purchase an abandoned sawmill and convert it into a juke joint intended to serve the local black community. Jordan's previous collaborations with writer director Ryan Coogler include Fruitvale Station, the Creed series, and Black Panther. This fifth joint project places particular demands on the actor, requiring him to differentiate two closely related yet distinct personalities while often sharing the frame or appearing in rapid succession. Production accounts note that the differences between the brothers are deliberately subtle rather than exaggerated, with Jordan focusing on small shifts in posture, vocal inflection, and emotional temperature. Smoke tends toward caution and calculation. Stack leans into charm and impulse. The dual performance also necessitated body doubles, including Percy Bell, who is credited as an incarcerated worker and as a body double for Smoke and Stack, along with additional uncredited doubles. The casting of Jordan was reported as early as January 2024, when the project was still untitled and in development at Kugler's Proximity Media. His involvement helped attract studio interest during a competitive bidding process that ultimately landed the film at Warner Bros. Pictures. Jordan has described the dual role as among the most challenging and rewarding of his career, citing the technical and emotional complexity of sustaining two coherent identities across a period horror narrative that mixes crime, music, family tension, and the supernatural. Hailee Steinfeld as Mary. Hailee Steinfeld plays Mary, Stack's former girlfriend who passes for white. The character carries residual anger over Stack's decision to leave her years earlier, a choice he framed as protective given the racial realities of the Jim Crow South. Mary reappears in the twins' orbit after their return and becomes entangled in the escalating events surrounding the juke joint's opening night. Her presence introduces questions of racial identity, loyalty, and the costs of survival in a rigidly segregated society. Steinfeld's casting was announced in April 2024 alongside several other supporting roles. Known for work ranging from True Grit to The Edge of 17 and later projects, she brings a capacity for both vulnerability and steel that suits a character navigating the space between communities. Production notes indicate that other performers, including Halsey, auditioned for the part before Steinfeld was selected. Her performance required navigating the film's tonal shifts from intimate drama to outright horror, particularly once Mary's path intersects with the film's central supernatural threat. Miles Cutton as Samuel Sammy Moore. Miles Cutton makes his feature film debut as Samuel Sammy Moore, also known as Preacher Boy, the younger cousin of Smoke and Stack. A sharecropper and aspiring blues musician, Sammy joins the twins despite warnings from his pastor father about the spiritual dangers of the blues. His guitar playing and singing become a pivotal force in the story. During the Juke Joint's opening night, his music summons spirits of performers from past and future, creating a transcendent communal moment that simultaneously attracts the film's antagonistic forces. Ketten's selection as a newcomer was deliberate. Kugler sought authenticity in the musical performances, many of which were recorded live on set with the cast performing alongside professional blues musicians. Catton's natural musicality and screen presence allowed him to embody both the youthful ambition of a young artist and the moral and spiritual conflicts that arise when that art collides with supernatural evil. Buddy Guy appears as elderly Sammy in framing sequences set decades later, providing a bookend that underscores the character's long term trajectory and the lasting impact of the night's events. Jack O'Connell as Remick. Jack O'Connell portrays Remick, an Irish immigrant vampire who arrives in the Mississippi Delta and becomes the primary supernatural antagonist. Remick shelters from Choctaw vampire hunters with a local clansman couple whom he turns into thralls. He later approaches the juke joint, offering money and music in exchange for entry, and eventually leads a hive minded but still individually distinct group of vampires against the survivors. His character draws explicit parallels between Irish historical experiences of dispossession and the African American experience under Jim Crow, a thematic thread Kugler has discussed in interviews. O'Connell was cast in April 2024 as the film's principal villain. His prior work in intense, physically demanding roles prepared him for a performance that balances menace, charisma, and a twisted form of cultural recognition. Remick's Irish background informs both his dialogue and the musical elements associated with him, contributing to the film's broader exploration of music as a force that can heal, summon, or attract dark powers across cultures. Wunmi Mosaku as Annie. Wunmi Mosaku plays Annie, Smoke's estranged wife and a practitioner of hoodoo. Annie believes her spiritual practices previously protected the twins, though Smoke remains skeptical after the death of their infant daughter. She serves as the juke joint's cook and later becomes a crucial source of knowledge about how to deter and destroy the vampires using traditional protective measures such as pickled garlic juice. Her character grounds the supernatural elements in African folk tradition and personal grief. Moscow's casting was announced in the same wave as several other key supporting roles. Known for work in Loki, Black Mirror, and other projects, she brings gravity and quiet authority to a role that requires both domestic intimacy and escalating urgency as the night unfolds. Annie's death during the climactic confrontation carries significant emotional weight for the remaining characters, particularly Mary and Smoke. Jamie Lawson as Pearline. Jamie Lawson portrays Pearline, a married Sikh singer who becomes the object of Sammy's affection. She performs at the juke joint's opening and later falls victim to the vampires. Lawson's casting continued Kugler's pattern of assembling a mix of established and rising talent. Her previous appearances, including in The Batman, demonstrate range that suited a character who moves from romantic interest and musical collaborator to tragic figure within the film's compressed timeline. Omar Benson Miller as Conrad. Omar Benson Miller plays Conrad, a sharecropper and the juke joint's bouncer. He has history with the twins from their earlier years in the community and is recruited for the opening night. Conrad is among the first to be turned by Remick outside the joint, becoming part of the vampire threat. Kugler has stated that Miller was at the top of his list for the role, describing Conrad as a neighborhood figure simply trying to get by who nevertheless shares a complicated past with Smoke and Stack. Miller's physical presence and ability to convey both everyday resilience and sudden vulnerability made him a natural fit. Delroy Lindo as Delta Slim. Delroy Lindo appears as Delta Slim, an older town harmonica player and local musical legend recruited to perform at the juke joint for a modest fee and free beer. His presence lends authenticity and generational depth to the musical sequences. Lindo's extensive stage and screen experience, including collaborations with Spike Lee and other major directors, allows him to embody a character who represents the living tradition of Delta blues. Delta Slim is among those killed during the final confrontation inside the joint. Supporting cast and ensemble Lee Junli and Yao portray Grace Chow and Bo Chow, a Chinese immigrant couple who run a local shop and supply food for the juke joint. Their inclusion expands the film's portrait of the Mississippi Delta's multi ethnic working class community. Grace's decision to invite the vampires inside during a moment of rage becomes a turning point in the siege. Helena, who plays their daughter Lisa, who is threatened by Remick as leverage. Lola, Kirk, and Peter Dremanis appear as Joan and Bert, a married Klansman couple who first shelter Remick and are turned into his thralls. David Maldonado plays Hogwood, the local landowner and clan leader from whom the twins purchased the sawmill. He later leads an attack that Smoke confronts at dawn. Saul Williams portrays Jedediah Moore, Sammy's father and the twins' uncle, a pastor who warns against the blues. Andrean Ward Hammond plays Ruthie, Sammy's mother. Nathaniel Arcand appears as Chayton, a Choctaw vampire hunter. Emily Ellison plays Therese, Cornbread's pregnant wife. Additional roles include Tanaj L. Jackson as Beatrice, Christian Robinson as Chris, and numerous dancers, patrons, and background performers who populate the juke joint sequences. Buddy Guy's appearance as elderly Sammy provides a coda that connects the 1932 events to a later timeline in which Sammy has become a successful blues musician. The casting of an actual blues legend reinforces the film's commitment to musical authenticity. Casting process and production context casting announcements unfolded in stages. Jordan's attachment was public by January 2024. In April 2024, O'Connell, Lindo, Lawson, Miller, Steinfeld, Lee Junli, Kirke, and Mosaku were reported. Further additions, including Yao, Katon, Dreymanis, and others, followed in May. Principal photography began in New Orleans on April 14, 2024, under the working title Grilled Cheese, and wrapped on July 17. The production employed large format 65 mm film, including IMAX and Ultra Panavision formats, which influenced how dual role scenes and ensemble musical numbers were staged and captured. Kugler's approach to casting emphasized both star power and cultural specificity. The ensemble mixes Kugler regulars, established character actors, rising talents, and first time film performers. Musical authenticity was prioritized. Many performances were captured live, and the presence of figures such as Buddy Guy and the casting of a newcomer with genuine musical ability in the central young musician role reflect that priority. Costume designer Ruth E. Carter reused and adapted research and certain pieces originally prepared for another period project, further grounding the visual world in which the cast operates. The dual role technical challenges for Jordan, the need for body doubles, the integration of live music, and the requirement that supporting players shift rapidly between ordinary community life and supernatural horror all shaped the casting decisions. Performers were selected not only for dramatic range, but for their ability to inhabit a specific historical and cultural milieu while delivering the heightened demands of a genre hybrid that moves between crime drama, musical celebration, family tragedy, and vampire siege. Ensemble dynamics and character functions, the casting creates a layered community portrait. The twins function as charismatic outsiders returning with money and ambition. Sammy represents youthful artistic possibility and spiritual conflict. Annie embodies traditional knowledge and personal loss. Delta Slim stands for musical continuity. Cornbread, the chows, and the various patrons and workers fill out the social fabric of the Delta. Mary and the Klansman couple introduce the racial and violent undercurrent of the period. Remick and his turned followers externalize both historical trauma and predatory force. Each major casting choice supports a specific thematic or narrative function. Jordan's dual performance allows the film to explore two complementary responses to the same history of violence and opportunity. Ketten's debut provides an open, unjaded presence around which the music and the supernatural converge. Steinfeld's Mary complicates racial boundaries. Mosaku's Annie anchors the protective spiritual tradition. O'Connell's remix supplies a charismatic, culturally specific antagonist whose motivations and methods escalate the stakes. The supporting ensemble ensures that the juke joint feels like a living, breathing community rather than a generic set of victims. The breadth of the credited cast, including numerous dancers and background players, underscores the importance of the communal sequences. The opening night performance sequence, in particular, relies on the collective energy of the ensemble to convey the transcendent power of Sammy's music before the horror fully arrives. Later, the same ensemble is transformed or eliminated, making the losses register as the destruction of a specific social world rather than abstract body counts. Technical and collaborative dimensions of the casting body doubles and careful camera work were essential for Jordan's dual role. The use of large format film placed additional demands on lighting, framing, and performance precision. Live musical recording required actors capable of performing under real conditions rather than lip syncing. The period setting demanded attention to dialect, physical carriage, and social comportment consistent with 1932 Mississippi. Casting directors and Kugler prioritized performers who could meet these overlapping requirements while remaining truthful to the character's emotional cause. The involvement of Ludwig Göransson as composer and executive producer, Autumn Durald Arkapaw as cinematographer, and Hannah Beechler as production designer created a collaborative environment in which casting decisions were informed by musical, visual, and design considerations from the outset. The result is an ensemble that feels organically integrated into a meticulously realized world rather than superimposed upon it. Individual character arcs and performance requirement smokes arc moves from pragmatic entrepreneur to protective, ultimately sacrificial figure. Stack's path involves charm, vulnerability, and a transformation that leaves him both free and forever changed. Sammy's journey traces the cost of artistic calling and the long shadow of a single night of violence and transcendence. Annie's role requires conveying grief, spiritual authority, and maternal fierceness. Mary's trajectory tests loyalty, desire, and survival. Remick's performance balances seduction, threat, and a twisted sense of shared historical grievance. Supporting players such as Delta Slim, Cornbread, and the Chaws must establish memorable presences quickly so that their fates carry weight. These requirements shaped not only the selection of principal actors but also the depth of the supporting and background casting. The film's success in creating a convincing community under siege depends on the cumulative effect of dozens of individual performances, each calibrated to the demands of the narrative and the technical constraints of the production. The casting of Sinners thus reflects a deliberate synthesis of star power, cultural authenticity, musical credibility, and ensemble cohesion. From Jordan's dual lead through the debut of Caton, the established presence of Lindo and Mosaku, the genre intensity of O'Connell, and the carefully chosen supporting players, every major role was filled with attention to both dramatic function and the specific historical and supernatural world Kugler constructed. The result is a cast capable of carrying a story that moves fluidly between intimate character drama, communal celebration, and full scale horror while remaining rooted in the social realities of the 1930s Mississippi Delta production development and pre production long before a single frame of Sinners was shot. The project existed only as a closely guarded secret inside Ryan Coogler's production company, Proximity Media. News of an untitled period film from the writer director first surfaced in January 2024 when trade outlets reported that Coogler was developing a new genre picture and had already lined up his longtime collaborator Michael B. Jordan to headline it. At that stage, almost nothing about the story, setting, or genre was made public. The two men had already built a substantial creative partnership by that point, having worked together across the Black Panther films and Creed, and their reunion for an original project, rather than an established franchise entry, was itself notable news within the industry. It signaled that Coogler, fresh off directing one of the biggest Marvel productions of the decade, wanted to pivot back toward a wholly original story that he would write, direct, and produce without the constraints of an existing cinematic universe. The secrecy surrounding the project was deliberate and extended well into production. Details about plot, genre, and even the title were withheld from the public for months. This approach mirrored a broader trend among filmmakers with sufficient clout to demand discretion from studios, but it also reflected Coogler's specific desire to let audiences discover the film's blend of genres: Southern Gothic period drama, gangster film, supernatural horror, and musical, without preconceptions shaped by marketing, because the project combined so many disparate elements. Revealing too much too early risked flattening it into a single easily marketable hook, such as vampire movie or period gangster film, when in fact it was attempting to be all of those things simultaneously. Once word got out that Coogler and Jordan were teaming up again, a bidding war erupted among major studios eager to acquire distribution rights. Sony Pictures, Warner Bros. Pictures, and Universal Pictures each fight for the project, a level of competitive interest that is relatively rare for an original, non franchise film without a pre existing fan base or intellectual property attached to it. The competition underscored how much value studios placed on Coogler's track record, particularly after the commercial success of the Black Panther films, as well as the drawing power of Jordan as a leading man. At the time the bidding was underway, the film's budget was already being discussed in the range of around $90 million, a substantial sum for an original horror adjacent project without a built in audience. What made the negotiations especially significant, however, were not just the size of the budget, but the terms Kugler was demanding from prospective distributors. In exchange for the distribution rights to his film, Kugler sought first dollar gross participation, meaning he would receive a percentage of the film's revenue starting from its very first dollar earned, rather than only after the studio had recouped its costs. He also asked for final cut privilege, which would give him, rather than the studio, ultimate creative control over the finished film, a right typically reserved for only the most established auteurs. Perhaps most strikingly, Kugler requested that ownership of the film itself would revert to him 25 years after its release. This kind of reversion clause is exceedingly uncommon in major studio filmmaking, where distributors typically retain perpetual ownership of the films they finance and release. These demands reflected a filmmaker attempting to secure not just creative freedom but long term economic and legal control over his work in a way that echoed the historical struggles of black artists, particularly musicians, to retain ownership of material they created within exploitative industry structures, a theme that would later prove thematically resonant with the film's own story about a black community fighting to build and protect something of its own. Ultimately, Warner Bros. Pictures won the distribution rights the following month in February 2024 by agreeing to Kogler's terms. The studio's willingness to accede to such unusual conditions signaled both confidence in Kugler's ability to deliver a commercially successful film and a broader recognition of his leverage as a filmmaker coming off major box office hits with distributions. secured, casting began to take shape through the spring of 2024. In April, Jack O'Connell was cast as the film's antagonist, a character who would later be revealed as Remick, an Irish vampire. O'Connell's casting was among the first specific role announcements tied to the project, though at the time the character's supernatural nature had not yet been disclosed to the public. Around the same period, several other key cast members joined the production in undisclosed roles, including Delroy Lindo, Jamie Lawson, Omar Benson Miller, Hailee Steinfeld, Lee Jun Lee, and Lola Kirke. The staggered nature of these announcements, each treated as its own piece of trade news, reflected both the significant industry interest in the project and the studio's continued effort to control the flow of information about the story. Wunmi Mosaku joined the cast as what was then described publicly only as Smoke's love interest, a role that would become Annie, Smoke's estranged wife and a practitioner of hoodoo spirituality. The character's significance to the story's themes around faith, protection, and cultural memory would only become clear once the film was released. But even the early casting reports hinted at the emotional centrality of her relationship to Jordan's character. The following month, in May 2024, several newcomers were added to round out the ensemble: Yao, Miles Keaton, and Peter Dremanis. Keaton's casting was particularly significant as the film would mark his feature film debut. He was cast as Samuel Sammy Moore, also known by the nickname Preacher Boy, a sharecropper and aspiring blues musician who becomes the emotional and musical heart of the film. Coogler's discovery of Keaton, a young musical talent, for such a central role would later become a notable talking point in press coverage once the film premiered, since the character required not just acting range but genuine musicianship, convincing enough to anchor several of the film's pivotal performance sequences. Christian Robinson was also added to the cast around this time. The casting process also generated some notable footnotes that later emerged in press coverage after the film's release. Musician and performer Halsey revealed that she had auditioned for the role that ultimately went to Hailee Steinfeld, the part of Mary, Stack's ex girlfriend, who is depicted as passing as white. Halsey's account of the audition, which she discussed publicly after the film had already found success, offered some insight into how competitive and wide ranging the casting search had been for even the film's key supporting roles. In a separate account that surfaced months later, musician Machine Gun Kelly said he had been offered the chance to audition for the role that eventually went to Peter Drymanis, a role involving a member of a clan affiliated couple in the film, but that he declined the opportunity because he was uncomfortable using a racial slur required by the material. This anecdote, while a minor footnote to the film's overall production history, drew some attention for illustrating the challenging and historically loaded nature of dialogue found in the screenplay. Given its setting in the Jim Crow era South, beyond the ensemble cast, Coogler assembled key collaborators for the technical and design elements of the production well before cameras rolled. Cinematographer Autumn Durald Arkapaw was brought on to shoot the film, continuing a professional relationship with Coogler that had developed on earlier projects. The decision to shoot on large format film, discussed further below, was one that had to be planned meticulously during pre production, since it required coordination with specialized camera equipment, film stock suppliers, and processing labs well in advance of the shoot. Production designer Hannah Beechler, another frequent collaborator of Coogler's from the Black Panther films, also joined the production to help realize the 1932 Mississippi Delta setting, a task that involved extensive research into period accurate architecture, town layouts, agricultural structures, and interior design appropriate to both black and white communities of the Jim Crow South. Costume design further illustrated the interconnected nature of the industry's larger corporate ecosystem during this period. Some of the film's costumes had originally been designed by Ruth E. Carter for a planned Marvel Cinematic Universe film, Blade, which had been intended as a period piece, When production on that film stalled, a well documented saga within the industry involving repeated delays, script rewrites, and tense changes in creative direction, Coogler approached Carter to bring her talents to Sinners instead. Because both projects were set during a similar historical period and shared overlapping stylistic sensibilities rooted in the Prohibition era, Carter found that her prior research for Blade translated naturally to the needs of Sinners. Marvel Studios permitted Carter to purchase costumes she had originally created for Blade so they could be repurposed for Coogler's film. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige later explained that the studio no longer had use for the costumes after deciding to move the Blade reboot away from a period setting, and that the studio was happy to see the material find a home in Coogler's production rather than sit unused in storage. This arrangement, while a small logistical detail in the broader scope of the film's pre production, offers a window into how major studio filmmaking often involves unplanned resource sharing between projects, especially when one production stalls while another is ready to move forward. Kugler has been candid in interviews about the wide array of influences that shaped the screenplay and his directorial approach during development. He cited the filmographies of Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, Christopher Nolan, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, and Spike Lee as key touchstones, with Nolan receiving a special on screen thanks credit in the finished film. He also pointed to the Metallica song One as a piece of art that influenced his thinking about the project, an unusual but telling reference point for a period Southern Gothic film. Perhaps more directly influential were the films of Robert Rodriguez, a filmmaker Kugler said he idolized while growing up. He specifically named two of Rodriguez's works, From Dusk Till Dawn 1996 and The Faculty 1998, as inspirations he drew upon while conceiving the story for Sinners. The connection to From Dusk Till Dawn, in particular, would later become a frequent point of comparison among critics once the film was released, given both films' shared structural approach of beginning as one genre before pivoting sharply into vampire horror partway through. Kugler also cited an array of other cinematic influences during the development process, including the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men 2007, Inside Levin Davis 2013, and Fargo 1996, as well as John Carpenter's The Thing 1982. Somewhat more unexpectedly, he noted that the Disney Channel original movie The Luck of the Irish 2001 served as a meaningful touchpoint during the writing process, an influence he elaborated on in later interviews as connecting to the film's Irish vampire character and its themes of cultural heritage and inherited identity. Another significant influence was Rod Serling's anthology series The Twilight Zone, which ran from 1959 to 1964. Kugler singled out the episode The Last Rites of Jeff Myrtlebank as a particular favorite that informed his approach to blending everyday small town life with the uncanny. Among non cinematic influences, Kugler identified Stephen King's 1975 novel Salem's Lot as the single biggest inspiration outside of film and television, a work that similarly explores a small insular American community's confrontation with a vampiric threat that exploits existing social fractures. Beyond these genre influences, Kugler spoke at length about the historical and cultural through lines he wanted to explore in the screenplay, particularly the parallels between African American, Irish, and Choctaw communities. He discussed the historical intermingling of these groups and how that intersection shaped shared and overlapping musical traditions in the American South. As part of this research, Kugler referenced Delta blues musician Charlie Patton, who Kugler has said was likely part Choctaw, and used Patton as the inspiration for the in story history of the guitar that Sammy carries throughout the film, a prop imbued with symbolic weight connecting the film's musical themes to a specific lineage of real blues history. Producer Sev Ohanian, who has an Armenian American background himself, has spoken about how personal the project was for Kugler, describing it as deeply rooted in the director's own family heritage and cultural identity. According to Ohanian, Kugler drew extensively from his family's history and his own lifelong passion for music while developing the script, and Ohanian has described the writing process as something Kugler experienced almost as a spiritual undertaking, one in which he felt guided by the presence of his ancestors. This framing casts the film's story about a black community building a space of joy and autonomy that is then besieged by a predatory outside force as an extension of Kugler's own exploration of inherited trauma, resilience, and cultural memory. Kugler has also spoken specifically about the character of Remick and the thematic logic behind making him an Irish immigrant vampire. He explained that Remick, despite being a supernatural predator, identifies with the film's black characters because of a perceived connection between the historical experiences of African Americans who were forcibly removed from the African continent and the historical experience of Irish people who were compelled to work land rich in resources while being systematically denied its benefits. Kugler described the parallels between these two histories as readily apparent to him, and this thematic architecture, the idea of shared, if distinct, histories of exploitation and displacement, became a structural undercurrent for the film's exploration of vampirism as a metaphor for cultural and economic predation. Filming principal photography on Sinners began in New Orleans on April 14, 2024, operating under the deliberately unassuming working title Grilled Cheese, a code name meant to obscure the film's true identity from public scrutiny, while location scouts, permits, and local press coverage inevitably generated some degree of visibility around the production. The choice of Louisiana as a filming location was consistent with the state's long established position as a hub for major studio productions, owing to its favorable tax incentive programs, its skilled below the line crew base, and its landscape, which could plausibly stand in for the Mississippi Delta setting of the story. Filming continued through the spring and into the summer, ultimately wrapping on July 17, 2024, after a shoot spanning roughly 3 months. One of the most consequential decisions made during pre production, with implications that stretched throughout the entire filming process, was the choice to shoot on 65mm film using a combination of IMAX 15 perf cameras and Ultra Panavision 70 cameras. This was a technically ambitious and logistically demanding choice. Large format film shooting of this kind requires specialized, heavy cameras, a comparatively small pool of technicians experienced in operating and maintaining such equipment, and a supply chain for film stock and processing that has grown increasingly scarce as digital cinematography has become the industry standard. Shooting with two distinct large format systems in tandem, rather than relying on a single format throughout, added a further layer of complexity since it meant that individual scenes would need to be planned according to which aspect ratio and visual texture best served the material. This dual format approach resulted in a finished film in which scenes alternate between two dramatically different aspect ratios. A boxy 1.431 ratio associated with IMAX's fullest frame and an extremely wide 2.76 one ratio associated with Ultra Panavision 70. The practical effect of this alternation, once the film reached audiences, was a shifting visual rhythm in which certain sequences, often those emphasizing intimacy, scale, or emotional immersion, would expand to fill the tallest, most enveloping frame available in commercial cinema, while other sequences would contract to a widescreen ratio associated with sweeping vistas and classic epic filmmaking. Sinners was reported to be the first film ever shot simultaneously on both Ultra Panavision 70 and IMAX formats, a genuine technical milestone within the history of large format cinematography. The significance of this achievement extended to the crew responsible for capturing it. In shooting the film this way, cinematographer Autumn Durald Arkapaw became the first female director of photography to shoot a movie on large format IMAX film, a distinction that placed her within a very small group of cinematographers, historically almost exclusively male, who have worked with this specialized and demanding format. This achievement would later be recognized formally when Akapa won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography for her work on the film, becoming the first woman to win in that category in Oscar history, as well as the first black winner of the award. Kodak, the film stock manufacturer whose products were essential to realizing the production's large format ambitions, created a special 65 mm version of its Ektachrome 100D 5294 film stock specifically for the production. This bespoke film stock was used for a flashback sequence within the film, allowing the production to achieve a particular visual texture associated with Ektachrome's distinctive color reversal process that differed from the look of the rest of the movie shot on standard negative film stocks. The willingness of a major film manufacturer to develop a customized product specifically for a single production underscores both the scale of the undertaking and the industry wide interest in supporting large format film photography, a format that has become something of a prestige signifier among directors seeking a distinctly cinematic, tactile visual quality that many believe digital cinematography cannot fully replicate. The financial scale of the Louisiana shoot was considerable. Production spent $67.6 million on location in the state, a figure that reflects not only the direct cost of cast and crew but also location fees, set construction, and the broader economic footprint the production had in the communities where it filmed. This on location spending represented a substantial portion of the film's overall budget, which had been reported at around $80 million when Warner Brothers greenlit the picture, but ultimately climbed to approximately $100 million by the time production wrapped, according to reporting from The Hollywood Reporter. The budget increase over the course of production is not unusual for ambitious original films, particularly those involving specialized formats, extensive visual effects, and elaborate period production design, but it nonetheless represented a meaningful escalation from the figures initially discussed during the studio bidding war. Among the film's most detailed and symbolically loaded design elements was the church set built for the production. Production designer Hannah Beechler acknowledged that the design of the church incorporated crossed beams deliberately constructed to evoke the crossed arm salute associated with Wakanda, the fictional nation at the center of the Black Panther films. This architectural detail functioned as a quiet tribute to the late Chadwick Boseman, the star of Black Panther, who had died in 2020 and whose absence continued to be felt across Coogler's subsequent projects. The tribute, hidden within the physical architecture of a set most audiences would only glimpse briefly on screen, exemplified the kind of embedded personal filmmaking choices that became a recurring point of discussion once fans and critics began dissecting the film's visual details after release. Visual effects for the production were handled by a coalition of several specialized studios rather than a single vendor, reflecting the scale and variety of effects work required across the film's blend of period drama and supernatural horror. Industrial Light and Magic, the storied effects house founded by George Lucas, contributed to the film's effects work alongside Storm Studios, Rising Sun Pictures, Barraboom Studios, Light VFX, and Outpost VFX. The involvement of multiple vendors on a single project of this kind is common in contemporary studio filmmaking, allowing different studios to specialize in different types of shots, whether digital creature work, set extensions, period accurate digital removals of anachronistic elements, or the elaborate transformation sequences associated with the film's vampire characters. While working under a unified visual effects supervision structure to maintain consistency across the finished film. Post production on Sinners proved to be an unusually lengthy and technically demanding phase of the filmmaking process, driven in large part by the same commitment to large format film photography that had defined the shoot itself. The film was originally scheduled for release on March 7, 2025, but that date was ultimately pushed back to April, with Sinners swapping release slots with the science fiction film Mickey 17. The stated reason for this delay was the need for additional time in post production, a consequence of the scarcity of film processing labs equipped to handle the specific large format film stocks used throughout the project. Because so few facilities worldwide are capable of processing and scanning 65mm film shot on IMAX and Ultra Panavision 70 cameras, productions relying heavily on these formats can face significant bottlenecks simply waiting for their film to be developed, scanned into digital intermediates, and prepared for the color grading, editing, and visual effects work that follows. This scarcity of lab capacity has become an increasingly pressing issue within the film industry as more high profile directors have returned to large format film photography in an effort to distinguish their work visually from the ubiquity of digital cinematography. Sinners was frequently cited alongside other major 2025 releases as part of a broader resurgence of interest in shooting on film, s- with industry trade press tracking which prominent filmmakers were continuing to work in physical film formats despite the logistical challenges involved. The decision by Kugler and his collaborators to push the release date back rather than rush the post production process or compromise on the technical execution of the finished film reflected the priority placed on delivering a polished, final product suited to the ambitious photographic approach undertaken during the shoot. Editing on the film was handled by Michael P. Shaver, tasked with assembling a story that moves fluidly between a grounded, character driven first half establishing the juke joint and its community, and a more overtly genre driven back half defined by supernatural horror and violence. Critics would later note this tonal and structural shift as one of the more divisive elements of the finished film, with several reviewers suggesting that the more grounded early sections of the story were stronger than the vampire centric material that followed, a structural characteristic that would have been shaped significantly during the editing process as the filmmakers worked to balance pacing, character development, and genre payoff across the film's 138-minute runtime. The extensive visual effects work required for the film's supernatural elements, including vampire transformations, hive mind sequences, and the fiery destruction of the vampire horde at the film's climax, was integrated during this post production period by the multiple effects vendors involved in the project. Coordinating visual effects work of this scale and specificity across several different studios required careful post production supervision to maintain visual consistency, particularly given the film's already distinctive and unusual photographic texture stemming from its large format film origins. Effects shots needed to be seamlessly matched to footage captured on physical film stock rather than the cleaner digital plates more commonly used as a baseline for visual effects integration in ch- contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. Music occupies a central thematic and narrative role in Sinners, functioning not merely as an accompanying score but as a plot device with the power to summon spirits across time. Composer Ludwig Göransson, a frequent collaborator of Kugler's dating back to earlier projects including Black Panther, was brought on to score the film and also served as an executive producer, a credit that reflected the depths of his creative involvement in shaping the film's musical identity from an early stage of development rather than being brought in only once the visuals were locked. Goranson has described the Sinner's score as both deeply personal and among the most ambitious projects of his career, characterizing it as reflective of his own musical journey as an artist who has moved across genres throughout his career. For his approach to the score, Goranson drew heavily on blues music traditions, going so far as to perform portions of the score himself on a 1932 Dobro Cyclops resonator guitar, notably the same instrument that the character Sammy carries with him throughout the film's narrative. This choice to physically play the same instrument depicted on screen speaks to a broader philosophy that guided the film's music department. Rather than treating the score as a separate, purely non diegetic layer of the film's sound design, the production sought to blur the boundary between the music heard by the audience and the music being performed by the characters within the story itself, reinforcing the film's central theme about the transcendent, almost supernatural power of musical performance. According to producer Sev Ohanian, the film functions in part as a dedication to Kugler's uncle James, described as the eldest male member of Kugler's family and a native of the Mississippi region depicted in the film. Lifelong conversations between Kugler and his uncle about the history and culture of the blues reportedly helped Kugler develop a deeply personal connection to the era and setting he would eventually dramatize in Sinners, and this personal history informed the seriousness and specificity with which the production approached its musical research. During pre production, Kugler sent Goranson period recordings from the 1930s and 1940s to serve as reference material, with particular emphasis on the recordings of Robert Johnson and Tommy Johnson, two of the most influential and mythologized figures in early Delta blues history. Robert Johnson, in particular, occupies an outsized place in blues folklore due to the legend that he sold his soul to the devil at a rural crossroads in exchange for his musical talent, a piece of American musical mythology that resonates directly with the film's own narrative concerning music, temptation, and supernatural forces. Goranson and Kugler made the decision to have Goranson's wife, Serena Goranson, a classically trained violinist, serve as a producer on the film's songs, a role distinct from the film's orchestral score. Serena Goranson has spoken about approaching the project with a strong sense of responsibility, noting that music rooted in the Southern Black musical tradition needed to be handled with care and with the guidance of experts steeped in that specific cultural and historical lineage. She described feeling like a steward of the project, particularly with respect to the music, emphasizing a sense that the material carried its own independent life and history that had to be honored rather than merely reproduced for cinematic effect. To ensure the authenticity of the film's musical world, the Goransons worked closely with Lawrence Boo Mitchell, a respected blues producer and the owner of Royal Studios, a historic recording facility. As part of their research process, the team visited the BB King Museum as well as local juke joints in Clarksdale and Indianola, Mississippi, both towns deeply tied to the historical geography of Delta blues music, accompanied by Mitchell, whose personal expertise and connections within the blues community proved invaluable to grounding the film's musical approach in a lived regional tradition rather than a more generalized or stylized approximation of the genre. The Goransons and Mitchell ultimately recorded the film's songs at Royal Studios over the course of 5 days, working with an accomplished roster of musicians including Alvin Youngblood Hart and Cedric Burnside, both respected figures within contemporary blues and roots music circles. Mitchell also brought in additional high-profile blues and R&B musicians to contribute to the recordings, including Brittany Howard, Raphael Sadiq, Bobby Rush, Christone Kingfish Ingram, and legendary blues guitarist Buddy Guy, who also makes an on screen appearance in the finished film. Guy's participation, both as a musician contributing to the soundtrack and as a performer within the film itself, represented a direct link between the production and the living tradition of blues performers whose careers stretch back decades, lending the project a further layer of authenticity and cultural continuity. Beyond the sessions at Royal Studios, the Goransons rented a studio that had been converted from a former church in New Orleans, where they worked directly with members of the supporting cast, including Jack O'Connell, Lola Kirk, Peter Drymanis, and James Lawson, rehearsing their musical performances multiple times ahead of filming. This extensive rehearsal process paid off during production, As much of the film's musical performance footage was recorded live on set rather than assembled afterward through conventional post production dubbing techniques, with cast members performing alongside professional blues musicians in real time. This commitment to live performance recording is relatively unusual for a major studio production and reflects the filmmaker's desire to capture the immediacy and spontaneity of live musical performance, qualities that are central to the film's thematic interest in music as a vessel for transcendence and communal connection. Beyond her work as an actress in the role of Mary, Hailee Steinfeld, who has an established music career alongside her acting work, wrote and recorded an original song titled Dangerous specifically for inclusion on the film's soundtrack, marking a return to music making for the performer within the context of this project. The release of the film's music followed an atypical path compared to most Warner Bros. Productions. Ordinarily, Warner Bros. Films release their soundtracks and scores through the studio's in house label, Water Tower Music. For Sinners, however, both the soundtrack and the score were instead released through Sony Music labels, specifically Sony Masterworks, a departure from standard practice that likely reflected specific label relationships or deal terms unique to this production's music rights. The soundtrack, comprising 22 tracks performed by a wide array of blues musicians alongside members of the film's cast, was released on April 18, 2025, the same day the film opened theatrically in the United States. Ahead of the soundtrack's full release, the lead single from the album, titled Sinners and performed by musician Rod Wave, was released roughly 2 weeks earlier as a way of building anticipation for both the film and its accompanying music. Rare's theatrical Sinners had its official premiere on April 3, 2025, at the AMC Lincoln Square Theater in New York City, a venue frequently used for high profile studio premieres given its prominent IMAX screen and central Manhattan location. The premiere event became a notable moment of its own within entertainment press coverage, with Michael B. Jordan drawing particular attention for a striking red carpet appearance in which he leaned into the film's dual role premise, appearing in a way that had fans and photographers commenting on the illusion of seeing double, a fitting piece of promotional theater given his performance as both Smoke and Stack in the finished film. Following the New York premiere, the film received its wide theatrical release across the United States on April 18, 2025. As discussed above, this release date represented a shift from the film's originally announced March 7, 2025 date, with Sinners and the science fiction film Mickey 17 effectively swapping their positions on the release calendar to accommodate the additional post production time required by Sinners' large format film photography. The theatrical rollout placed considerable emphasis on premium and large format exhibition consistent with the technical ambition embedded in the production from its earliest stages. In addition to the standard digital theatrical release that reaches the vast majority of multiplexes, the film received 10 IMAX 70mm film prints, a comparatively rare and expensive form of physical film exhibition reserved for only a small number of the highest profile theatrical releases each year. Given the scarcity of theaters equipped to project actual 70mm film rather than digital IMAX presentations, the film also received five standard 70mm prints intended for exhibition at theaters equipped with 70mm projection capabilities but without full IMAX format screens. This layered distribution strategy, combining digital, standard 70mm, and IMAX 70mm formats, allowed audiences in different markets to experience varying degrees of the film's intended visual presentation. With the IMAX helps me improve, with the IMAX 70mm prints in particular offering the fullest release issue 1 276 but 1 aspect ratios that defined the film's cinematography. The film's connection to its real world setting was honored in a particularly meaningful way in late May 2025 when Sinners was screened in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the town in which the story is set. Notably, Clarksdale did not have a functioning movie theater of its own at the time, a detail that speaks to the broader economic challenges facing small towns throughout the Mississippi Delta region, many of which have lost commercial infrastructure, including movie theaters, over recent decades. In the absence of a traditional cinema, the town's civic auditorium hosted six separate showings of the film, each introduced in person by Kugler, Goranson, and other filmmakers involved in the production. Beyond the screenings themselves, the town hosted panels and question and answer sessions connected to the film across a 3 day festival weekend, transforming what might have been a simple regional promotional stop into a more substantial community event that reconnected the film with the specific geography and cultural history that had inspired it. Later in the film's theatrical run, AMC Theaters organized a nationwide promotion tied to Juneteenth, offering discounted screenings of Sinners at its locations across the country to mark the holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. This kind of targeted promotional tie in, occurring roughly 2 months after the film's initial release, reflected both the film's continued box office strength well past its opening weeks and its resonance with themes of Black history, culture, and resilience that made a Juneteenth time promotion a natural fit for the material. Home media sinners moved to digital streaming platforms for purchase and rental on June 3, 2025, roughly 6 weeks after its theatrical debut, a timeline consistent with contemporary studio practices for transitioning major theatrical releases to premium video on demand availability. Physical home media formats followed shortly after, with the film arriving on 4K Ultra HD Blu ray, Standard Blu ray, and DVD on July 8, 2025. This staggered rollout, digital purchase first, followed by physical media roughly a month later, reflects standard industry sequencing designed to maximize revenue across different consumer purchasing behaviors and formats before a film eventually becomes available through subscription streaming services. Sinners premiered on HBO Max, Warner Brothers Discovery's flagship streaming service, on July 4, 2025, making the film available to subscribers roughly 3 months after its theatrical debut. In conjunction with this streaming premiere, Warner Bros. Announced that Sinners would be available to stream with an accompanying interpretation track in Black American Sign Language, commonly abbreviated as BASL, a distinct sign language variant that developed within Black deaf communities in the United States, particularly in the historically segregated South, and which differs in various respects from standard American Sign Language. The company described this as the first instance of a film being offered by a streaming service with a dedicated BASL interpretation option, positioning the release as a notable step toward more culturally specific and inclusive accessibility offerings within the streaming industry, one that aligned meaningfully with the film's own deep engagement with Black Southern history and culture. Later in the year, the film expanded to additional streaming platform, becoming available on Amazon Prime Video starting December 26, 2025. This move to a second major streaming service roughly 8 months after theatrical release reflected licensing arrangements common for high performing studio films, which are often made available across multiple platforms over time to maximize both revenue and audience reach well beyond their initial theatrical and premium streaming windows. Reception box office Sinners achieved substantial commercial success worldwide, grossing $280 million in the United States and Canada and an additional $90.2 million across other international territories, for a global cumulative total of $370.2 million against a reported production budget of $90 to $100 million. These figures placed the film comfortably among the more successful original non franchise studio releases of its release year, a notable achievement given the increasingly rare occurrence of large scale original films, as opposed to sequels, reboots, or films based on pre existing intellectual property. achieving this level of box office performance in the contemporary theatrical marketplace. Despite the film's strong headline gross figures, considerable industry discussion emerged around the question of the film's actual profitability, a debate driven by the unusual financial terms Kugler had negotiated during the project's development. Some publications estimated that the film needed to gross between $170 million and $185 million simply to break even, once factors including the film's production budget, Kugler's first dollar, gross participation, and various premium video on demand and streaming licensing deals with platforms including Amazon Prime and Netflix were taken into account. Other industry sources placed the break even threshold considerably higher, in the range of $200 million to $225 million, while the media outlet Puck offered an even more conservative estimate, suggesting the film may have needed to clear as much as $300 million to be profitable once its production budget, an estimated $50 million to $60 million marketing spend, and the standard industry assumption that theaters retain roughly half of ticket sales revenue were all factored into the calculation. This financial discourse became something of a flashpoint within entertainment media coverage of the film, drawing criticism from fans and industry figures alike, who felt that certain outlets were unfairly downplaying an otherwise clear commercial and critical triumph by focusing coverage on box office break even calculations, Kugler's personal compensation, and broader speculation about the film's ultimate profitability. Actor and director Ben Stiller was among the prominent industry figures who publicly criticized this style of coverage, specifically calling out pieces published by Variety, the New York Times, and Business Insider for what he and others characterized as a skeptical or dismissive framing of the film's success. This controversy reflected a broader, ongoing tension within entertainment journalism between headline box office figures, which tend to generate straightforward and often celebratory coverage, and the more complex underlying economics of modern studio filmmaking, particularly for films involving unconventional profit participation deals of the kind Kugler had negotiated. By September 2025, later reporting from Variety indicated that the film was expected to generate a theatrical profit of around $60 million, a figure that suggested the more optimistic assessments of the film's commercial performance had ultimately proven closer to accurate than some of the more skeptical early projections. In terms of its actual box office trajectory, Sinners opened in the United States and Canada from 3,308 theaters, with pre release tracking projecting an opening weekend in the range of $30 million to $40 million. The film exceeded these projections comfortably. It earned $19.2 million on its first day of release, a figure that included an estimated $4 7 million generated by Thursday night preview screenings ahead of the official Friday opening. Over the course of its full opening weekend, the film went on to debut with $48 million domestically, a result that not only topped pre release projections but also allowed it to finish first at the weekend box office, notably surpassing Warner Bros.' own holdover release, a Minecraft movie, which earned $40. 5 million in its third weekend of release. The fact that both films were distributed by the same studio and both cleared $40 million in the same weekend was itself a significant milestone, marking the first time a single studio had achieved two films grossing more than $40 million apiece over a single weekend since 2009. The strength of Sinners' opening was contextualized within the broader landscape of original studio filmmaking, with its debut marking the best opening weekend for an original film since Jordan Peele's Us, which opened to $71 million in 2019. Notably, a significant portion of Sinners' opening weekend business came from walk up ticket purchases rather than advance sales, particularly on the Saturday of its opening weekend, with 61% of attendees report to have purchased their tickets the same day they saw the film. This pattern indicated that positive word of mouth was playing an outsized role in driving audiences to theaters, rather than the film relying primarily on pre release marketing and advanced ticket sales, a dynamic often associated with films that resonate especially strongly with audiences upon release. Premium large format and IMAX screenings accounted for 45% of the film's opening weekend business, a substantial proportion that reflected both the availability of the film's specialized 70 mm and IMAX 70 mm prints and audience enthusiasm for experiencing the film in its most technically ambitious presentation format. Exit polling conducted around the film's opening weekend offered further insight into what was drawing audiences to theaters. 47% of moviegoers cited Michael B. Jordan as a reason for their ticket purchase, while 40% cited Ryan Coogler specifically, and 45% cited positive word of mouth as a motivating factor. The polling also indicated that 64% of opening weekend attendees were 35 years old or younger, with 46% falling specifically within the 25 to 34 age range and only 2% under the age of 18, suggesting the film skewed toward an adult audience consistent with its R rating and horror content. In terms of racial and ethnic demographics, the opening weekend audience was 49% black, 27% Caucasian, 14% Latino and Hispanic, 6% Asian, and 4% Native American or other, a spread that industry reporting characterized as a particularly strong and diverse turnout across multiple demographic groups, a pattern often cited as a sign of a film's broad crossover appeal beyond any single core audience segment. Internationally, Sinners opened with $15.4 million dollars from 71 foreign markets during its debut weekend, contributing to a combined global opening weekend total of $61 million dollars when domestic and international figures were combined. This international debut, while modest compared to the film's eventual domestic performance, laid the groundwork for steady international growth over subsequent weeks as word of mouth and critical acclaim continued to build.